Sabrina 70s comic issue 2. With Hilda in purple this time, she asks Sabrina why Archie's here, talking as if she's recognized him but never saw him in the house before. Sabrina says that she invited him over, and Hilda's hoping she's interested in other boys than Harvey. So this is about Harvey, not about the fact that he's immortal. But because this isn't the later comic, this isn't the case. Sabrina stands up for Harvey and says that Harvey just wanted a guitar lesson. Wait, how does that make sense? If Hilda doesn't even like Harvey being here, wouldn't it make more sense for Archie to be invited over to Harvey's house? Because Harvey's not on a date with Sabrina. Sabrina doesn't have to be around him at all. You'd think that Archie would have gone to Harvey's house. None of this story would happen. But I guess the justification is that Harvey likes Sabrina so much that he's willing to do this at her house, even though she doesn't have to be around him at all. I guess he really wants to see her, witness him learn how to play the guitar, because he likes her that much. Hilda has no faith in Harvey and complains that he doesn't even have the good manners to wave goodbye yet. At least I hope that's what she means, because there's no way someone could not know how to wave goodbye. Hilda unrealistically falls over while laughing and says that Archie would have better luck trying to teach a hippo how to dance. Aside from Harvey being clumsy, it seems like him being a complete idiot is just an informed flaw. And we've only got Hilda's word for it, which makes these jokes annoying. Sabrina says she's gonna eat those words. If Hilda's right, then Sabrina would have an unrealistically idealized opinion of Harvey and will eventually get tired of him for constantly disappointing her as she wants him to be better than he is. It'd be more sweet if she knew what he was like and still liked him. Hilda says that Harvey's tone deaf and tells Harvey to play guitar to make her laugh. So Sabrina predictably decides to use magic to make the guitar play. But the problem is, Harvey's hand can't possibly be moving here. There's no movement lines, and Harvey's clearly confused. I assumed, naturally, that her spell was going to make him play the guitar really well. Instead, she does this. Oh, Archie and Hilda reference magic fingers, so I guess his fingers did move. I guess either Sabrina knows a guitar too, or Magic tapped into Akashic records to find the knowledge of how to play the guitar well. Maybe witches themselves made the Akashic records. Like it's an internet database of all knowledge, to make magic easier for everyone. Hilda's smart enough to figure out what Sabrina did right away, while Harvey gets an ego, and Archie invites him to sit in with their group at the school dance. Sabrina's happy about Nevermind, she's realistically worried, and tells Archie that Harvey's not ready. Why doesn't she use magic to brainwash them out of this decision and erase their memories of what happened? Hilda even taunts her that she'd love to see Harvey get what he deserves. Then Hilda tells Harvey to show the world his great talent. I wish we saw Sabrina try to use her magic to get out of this, like I said. Only for Hilda to use magic to return things to normal because she really wants to see Harvey humiliated. So this is another time where Sabrina's use of magic only backfires on her. Unless she's using it to undo her previous mistake. This kind of thing was such a problem in the show that it made me wonder why she was even bothering to use magic anymore instead of learning her lesson. It's not a problem if most of her spells, or at least half of them, do work out like she wants. Which must have been the case in the later comic if they didn't make this complaint. And it was the case, I counted. So she's not using magic enough. Harvey's polite enough not to react to Hilda's insulting remark. I feel like there's too many panels of Sabrina being told that Harvey's gonna go play in front of an audience. I got it the first time. Sabrina desperately tries to tell Hilda she doesn't have to go see. And Sabrina doesn't want to let Harvey make a fool of himself in front of all those kids. They're teenagers. That always bothered me. Anyways, this would inevitably lead to her using magic on him again. But she has to let him humiliate himself eventually. She won't always be there to cast a spell on him. With all of Hilda's mockery of Harvey, I'm wondering if the comics leading up to a subversion were the reverse foreshadowing of being naturally gifted. Otherwise, that'd be a depressing ending for a story in a lighthearted comic. Hilda says that she's keeping her eye on Sabrina, so she can't use magic on him. Why would her previous spell be temporary? Why is she just assuming Sabrina's spell isn't still on him? Well, considering that she didn't want Harvey to play in a concert because it wouldn't be his natural talent, it does make sense that she'd assume that she took her spell off him. But we didn't see her do that. Oh, come on. Sure, Sabrina convincingly got Hilda to look over there by saying Cousin Ambrose was here. That could very well be true for all she knows. But she obviously would have heard Sabrina say that spell. Maybe she did, since she immediately accused her of magic. But she didn't have to say a spell the first time she used magic. She cast a spell, making Harvey suck at it. And Sabrina cast her spell again, and Hilda cast her spell again. You'd think everyone near them would hear them say their spells. This wouldn't be a problem if they simply thought their spell, if they have to make a rhyming spell to keep focused on something so complicated. Someone's clearly looking at Hilda when she says that if Sabrina casts one more spell, she won't let her out of the house for a week. But she could just warp out of the house, so I guess she means she'll take her powers away during that time. I guess a spy would erase his memory of that. And again, the tale of a text bubble is misplaced. I assume it's Hilda who said that she wants to hear Harvey play on his own. There's a zap, and the music plays again, with Harvey saying that it's playing again, as if he knows the guitar was playing itself. I wonder if Cousin Ambrose did it. It's nice of Archie to say that this was a strange but good arrangement. But it's also so unrealistic. I think it's pretty obvious that if this was being realistic, the entire audience would think he did a terrible job, even if he played well sometimes. They'd only focus on the bad parts. Oh, instead this new Cousin Al saved the day. Well, it would be too silly of a coincidence if it really was the cousin she mentioned earlier. He fortunately explains why he's here. He came to pay his family a visit, and Ambrose told him what was going on. She gives Al a hug, saying she loves him. And when he asks to give her a ride back to the house, she smartly tells him not to show his face at her house for a while, or else Hilda would figure it out. In the next story, Cousin Bert shows up. Another cousin. It makes sense that she would have a lot of cousins because witches live for a really long time. And he's a hippie, so why didn't they just use Sylvester? Of course, it's plausible that there'd be multiple hippies in her family, but still. It'd suck if the comic did this too much, bring in new redundant characters all the time when there's no reason not to just have Sabrina use magic instead. She's actually happy and says that she didn't recognize him with all that hair. And Ambrose asks, how can long hair be cool? Hilda asks what they've been teaching him at Salem University. The exact same university that Cousin Sylvester went to. And just like him, he says that he's with the new peaceful witch movement. And this time it's with a bunch of ladies with them. Is this a retcon rewriting Sylvester's story? Is that story non-canon now? That's pretty early to change your mind on a story. She's reacting to this like it's the first time it happened. It seems boring redundant to show us a plot with the exact same premise as last time. Like I'm seeing a game adaptation. But hopefully different stuff will happen this time instead of a window being broken again. He says he's teaching the girls how to conform the old establishment to the ways of the new movement. He's not showing much self-awareness here, because saying conform makes him sound like he's in the wrong and should respect them instead. It seems like the writer is portraying him as the bad guy. He uses magic to make Sabrina's house look like a hippie house. And Hilda's naturally angry at losing her furniture. He doesn't want to be called by his old name, calling it an old establishment name. That's taking it a bit too far. What would his parents think? Why does he think changing the furniture would make people willing to listen to him? He really is an idiot if he thought doing that would be a good idea. He's immediately happy to see Sabrina, saying that she's really grown. It's ironic that he says that she dresses old-fashioned, because I bet it was up to date with the fashion of the time. He uses his magic to change her appearance, and then her text bubble is colored green for no reason, as she said she thinks it's groovy. While in the story with Sylvester, she wasn't so happy about this. And why is Hilda's text bubble yellow now? I don't see the point of changing the colors of text bubbles for no reason. It's just confusing. At least give the text bubble of every character their own color, or associate certain colors with certain emotions if you're going to do that. Suddenly Sabrina's back to normal and says that she didn't say anything wrong. So she was brainwashed into saying that earlier, and doesn't remember it. And he changed her back because he knew Hilda hated it. But then he insults her anyways. He lampshades that Hilda looks like she's going to a Halloween party. Why is it misspelled? It'd be kind of interesting if they kept this Halloween spelling for the whole comic, establishing that in this universe, that's how it's spelled. But I doubt it will be. He changes her clothes with magic, and she says she feels undressed. And yet she was perfectly fine with giving herself a makeover to humor Sabrina at the start of the 97 comic, which had her dressed in modern clothes. Reading this comic really makes it clear how out of character Hilda and Zelda were at the start of the 90s comic. He stupidly acts happy, saying that he bets she loves the change and feels younger. But unlike in the later comic, he's wrong. And she threatens to run her nephew out of town on her broom. At least she's not brainwashing him into being like her. Why is the girl on the right still smiling at this point? Is she stoned or finding this funny? He says that brooms give people splinters, and he says that what she needs instead is a motorcycle, which he calls a chopper for some reason. That makes me think of a helicopter. She says to get out of here because this isn't a garage. There's no way she can reasonably explain why she'd prefer a broom to this beyond her being old-fashioned. Normally motorcycles are dangerous, but if she's a witch who can fly on things and make herself levitate whenever she wants, then she'd be able to use her magic to fly well enough to not crash. So that would keep her safe regardless of whether she's flying on a broom or a motorcycle, which would obviously look cooler. Well, it'd look cool if it was black, not mostly white. Sabrina's nice enough to say this is a great idea, but dumb enough to say so in front of her aunt. She's happy at the idea of going on her appreciative cousin's ride, and Hilda takes this as the last straw because he's a bad influence on Sabrina. I definitely prefer this story with Sylvester, because there, the entire point he was trying to make, that he was allowed to make, was that the new witches are nice to mortals. It had an actual point to the story. But here, he's just about being a hippie and is made a complete fool out of. Why won't he tell her that the new witches are about being nice to mortals as his first message? That should be considered the most important one. The only important one. It'd be world building. Why else would he have a peace sign? I really wish he didn't have long hair. It made him annoying to look at the whole time. It's a shame because otherwise I'm fine with him. He can like whatever he wants, but he should know that he's making himself the bad guy by trying to force it on other people without even trying to explain why he prefers the other furniture and clothes. Though it's very hard to explain why he preferred the look of something objectively. All he can really say is, I just like it. He says that her house looks too old, and then uses magic to make it look like a hippie house. Again, what a dumb decision. His behavior would make total sense if he was intentionally trying to spite Hilda the whole time. And if you're told that he knew she's not allowed to actually punish him with magic, like turning him into a frog or killing him. So he has nothing to fear. Instead he seems completely well-intentioned, saying that she can thank him for this because now she won't be called a square anymore. I'd say he sure is brave for trusting an evil witch so much, but again, he probably has a good reason to trust her because they're related. He knows there's a limit to how much she would do to him. But that should be explained, so he doesn't look that stupid. He flies away on the motorcycle for some reason, when teleporting away would be much faster. I guess he does it because he just loves flying. Which has to be why witches even bother with flying. Ambrose is smiling when he says that's not over and it's just the beginning. So did he just find all of this amusing at Hilda's expense? It makes sense if he was visiting Zelda, who still hasn't talked. She sure is the quiet one. Or it's laryngitis. Well, that should be explained then. Finally, in the next story, we started out seeing Archie in front of Sabrina being told to leave the basketball court by his coach because he somehow tripped over the ball 5 times. How's it even possible to trip on a ball? Wouldn't he just kick it? I guess he tripped by accidentally putting his foot on it while trying to walk. Maybe that makes sense? But you'd think he would see what's ahead of him. Reggie insults him too much, acting annoyingly arrogant as he's good at basketball. Why did anyone put up with this character? Speaking of that, how does Veronica just say he's great instead of hating him? Well, to be fair, he's not being any different than Sonic at his worst, who's also egotistical and able to back it up. It's forgivable with Sonic because he's a hero, and competent, so he does enough good things and shows a soft side enough that you see him as deeper than just a smug jerk, at least in the good continuities. Why are there so many panels being wasted on Reggie's taunts and Archie being humiliated? I got it the first time. It's dragging out a mundane plot point to artificially pad things out with boredom. Finally, after all that, Sabrina casts magic. She thinks that Archie needs cheering up, so maybe a tug on her ear will help. It's interesting that she can use magic that way instead of always making it obvious by pointing. And I've seen magic used this way in Wizards of Waverly Place too. So that's nostalgic for me. I wish that show had way more magic in it. Suddenly Archie feels confident and asks Reggie to throw him the ball. He does so hoping he'll be humiliated, and he dunks it immediately. When Sabrina was thinking that he needed cheering up, I was hoping they were going for a subversion where she was smart enough to realize that it'd be unfair to everyone else to make him magically good at basketball and have consequences where he'd be expected to stay good at it when he's cheating. Especially since being against that is exactly why she didn't want to keep Harvey really talented at the guitar when he was only talented at it because of her. So I assumed that her spell would just cheer him up, and that was it, because that was the moral standard she established earlier. She wanted to redeem him in the eyes of his peers, but clearly didn't think ahead. I don't feel like I need to talk about anything past him dunking the ball. We got it the first time. But it made sense that he needed to show he could do that again to prove they didn't just get lucky. The coach tells Archie that he could be the team's star player in tonight's game. I'm glad Reggie's upset at this, and that Archie made a basketball bounce off his head and into the net. If he gets humiliated in every single story he's in, and it's satisfying enough, then Reggie could be halfway worth it. He's reminding me of the bully Anton from the Sonic manga. He was there so you'd enjoy seeing him get slapstick. But seeing this made me think realistically about how getting a basketball to the head would actually injure him. It made me wonder if it was realistic for the coach to not care and just say it was fantastic. Does he hate Reggie just as much as him? This story's lucky I'm humoring it as much as I am by talking about it, since it seems to put the Archie characters in focus, while putting the much more interesting Witch on the literal sidelines. And it's boring, dragging out a mundane plot more than it needs to. Somehow. The coach says that if that's how Reggie's gonna play, he won't even be in the game. And he should sit down and let Archie take his place. It makes sense if he was saying this because Reggie just got a head injury, so he should go to the hospital, or at least the nurse. But instead he says he's a bad player now because Archie hit him by surprise. Fortunately, Sabrina shows she's a good person again, saying that she's made Reggie depressed now. But you'd think that her saying that out loud so close to everyone around her would immediately make them look at her and question this. It should have been a thought bubble. At least the consequences to her magic are realistic. Veronica says that she'll let Archie escort her to the victory dance tonight if they win. Let him? You'd think if she really loved him, she'd want a date with him regardless. So that's why I was always on Betty's side. I always remembered Veronica's a jerk. I hope it's explained that she buys Archie tons of great things, and so it's only smart of him to take advantage of that. Who wouldn't? But that leaves him in the position where he has to humor her and date her instead of a nice girl, or he might not get gifts and fancy dates anymore. But the whole premise is centered around the unrealistic idea that Betty and Veronica will keep competing for him no matter who he dates. Like he's a polygamist and is socially accepted. A gutsy, radical idea that probably got the comic popular in the first place. He has good reason to think he can get away with this because he always does. I assume the reason Veronica thinks she's so great is because she's pretty. Sabrina complains that she gave Archie so much confidence that he turned into Reggie. So he's no better than him. He's just the loser instead of the winner most of the time. Because the minute he becomes a winner, he becomes like Reggie. Like all he needs is more luck. Again, why is no one reacting to Sabrina saying this out loud? And it's always been weird to me that Sabrina's being drawn differently than she was in the stories before this. It's like she's a different person. Or it's a different universe entirely. I thought of that the minute the story started, but I was holding off on complaining about it. But now I'm bored enough that I feel like it. Betty cries, and Sabrina compassionately asks her what's the matter. And is told that Archie was supposed to take her to the dance instead. And now he won't even know she's alive. I thought he was a good person. I thought that was his one good quality. I wish it was explained that he's just trying to get expensive gifts out of Veronica, instead of him being a total jerk who implies that he doesn't actually like Betty, and is only dating her because he wants to settle, because sometimes Veronica's a jerk. Maybe he doesn't love Betty if he's fine with obviously upsetting her, as long as it means getting to date a rich girl. All he needed was to review one story like this to feel like these two girls would be better off without him. Won't he be able to hear her sobbing, since she did it in the same panel as him? And how sociopathic is Veronica to not try to comfort her if she has to hear her sobbing as well? Maybe they did notice and feel sorry for her, and we just couldn't see it because the panels didn't have any room for them looking at her. It's confusing because we're supposed to believe that Veronica is her friend, and so is Archie. So Sabrina unzaps the spell to fix things, tugging her ear again. I'd like to see her do magic that benefits her more often than not, though. She'd work better as an escapist character that way, using her magic casually a lot. I guess the writers think we'd be too jealous of her if they didn't have her screw up every single spell. The story has impressively fast pacing, finally. Because instead of us having to wait until the next night, after a time skip, for Archie to demonstrate that he's back to normal, the coach miraculously thinks to tell Archie to do some practice baskets for no reason. So he throws the basketball at his head. Somehow he's fine afterwards instead of having a concussion. Maybe I'm overestimating the damaging effects of sports balls. I mean, I know I got hit by one at some point, and I was fine afterwards. But still, you'd think he'd look more worse for wear in the next panel instead of still standing up, without even a bump or black eye. These characters are all teenagers. Why would showing Bruce on them be considered too dark? It should never get too dark, obviously. But still, it looks like its intended audience would be teenagers because all of the characters are above the age of a kid. Archie slips, and the coach says that he knew it was too good to be true, and he tells Reggie to go on the court and takes Archie out of it. I hate that Reggie had that line. I'd much rather see him get humiliated again. I hope he's firmly the scrappy. Veronica looks like a jerk saying to forget the dance, but she is relatable when she says that she wouldn't want him to stumble over his own feet. Or hers. Who would want that? It's smart of her to think she could do better. But then why did she keep going after him? You'd think if she was arrogant because she's pretty, she'd think that she could date any guy and wouldn't need to settle for him. But I guess she does settle for him because most guys think she's a jerk and don't ask her out. Or maybe she thinks that she's better than every guy, so she has to settle for Archie. I'm forced to assume that she thinks he's really handsome, so she can't help herself. Betty's nice to him, saying to cheer up and be happy that he was doing great out there, even if briefly. Even though it didn't matter because it was just practice. The story ends with her saying it was for a short spell, and Sabrina asks how she knew that, looking serious like she actually thinks she figured it out. Well, it was really obvious. And it's relatable that someone with a secret would be paranoid that someone would figure it out. I just feel sorry for Betty. She could do way better than him. So I'm just wondering why she's settling. It's just a severe crush. And why did the story in a Sabrina comic have to force me to talk about the Archie characters so much like I was reviewing an Archie story, when Archie's more mainstream? I hope I'm actually allowed to review it. I know the Archie fanfiction was made illegal. There's actually a story after this, but it seemed so off-putting to me at first that I didn't review it until the next day. Maybe because it seemed really cliche and started out with me detached from it because there's narration out of nowhere. Out of nowhere, we see Sabrina approaching a house past an opened gate, while narration says that it squatted and clutched the crest of the hill like a fat gray spider. Crest? Then it seems like the narration is talking about a house. So why did the narration say it squatted? Houses can't do that. That's bad narration. It's pretentious, trying to use words unexpectedly and just coming off as not knowing what the words mean. Like the narrations in Flint's fanfiction. As the car driver fled back to town in terror, for no stated reasons, so I can't take it seriously, and I wonder why Sabrina came to this house, Sabrina stood by the rusted gateway and drank in the horror of her inheritance, and the double doors of a manor beckoned her. Again, pretentious narration, and it's especially confusing because it's first person from Sabrina, a dumb teenage girl. I assume this is a haunted house, but Sabrina's a witch. She would be able to handle herself just fine. No matter what. Unless she's robbed of her powers. I can't take this seriously right now because I don't know why she's here, so the plot feels arbitrary. This started out in media res, giving me no reason why I should think this house is evil. All it's doing is having flowery narration that tells you that the house is really run down. That's why the hinges of the opening doors creak so much. Once Sabrina used magic so that they wouldn't creak. Finally, a suspiciously smirking guy says that Sabrina's here and she's finally the new owner of the Doonesbury Manor. Why would a teenage girl be given this? Is he a witch too and rules are different in the other realm? Because this isn't the other realm, but it could still be a witch's manor. The guy introduces himself to her as someone who's been caring for the place since she lost an uncle we never heard of. Sabrina's narration disturbingly reveals that she felt herself blushing from his frank inspection and liked the glint in his eyes. She's not drawn as blushing though. I wonder if this whole plot is a ripoff of something else and I just don't know the reference. That has to be the only explanation for why the story started out in media res and put Sabrina in a situation she doesn't belong in a genre she doesn't belong in. And it's just detrimental to the enjoyment of the story by making it confusingly illogical. Sabrina's told that she'll meet the other caretakers of the house later, and he wants to show her to her room. I don't know why she's here without her aunts. Suddenly she gets pushed forwards by something invisible, and a door almost falls on her. The mustache guy she just met, who's not her boyfriend, remember, calms her down by holding her, and made the narrow escape worthwhile, apparently. I have to assume the story has her as an adult the whole time, or else none of this would make sense. But then the narration should have explained this from the start. It's annoying otherwise. He justifies that the door fell because of dry rot, and Sabrina doesn't believe him and doesn't feel welcome anymore. Then why doesn't she just immediately leave? She could warp home whenever she wants. So the rest of this is just an idiot plot. Got it. She wished that he would stay by her side, but he insisted that she'd rest, without him. And the door clicked shut. She tells him to stay with her, and she's locked in. She screams in a room that's apparently soundproof as she keeps hitting it. And then finally she realizes this is silly and says, "What's a locked door to a witch?" Oh good, it's just a parody. Never mind, her spells don't work. Because bullshit. So it really is taking itself too seriously. There's only so seriously I can take it if I start out the story confused. We need background. I wish it was explained that, as I wondered right away, because it's always the witch side of her family that gets referenced, that guy was a witch. It'd make a lot more sense to me that all this supernatural stuff is a witch's fault, not a ghost. Except if a witch wanted to kill her, he'd just instantly do so. Not make a bunch of avoidable death traps in a house. He just point at her and she collapsed of a heart attack. Wouldn't he point to knock her unconscious? At least grab her and snap her neck? This would apply to any ghost too. Sabrina gets knocked out by sudden gas that exists for no apparent reason. She fell back against the bookcase and opened into a secret stairway, and she fell through it. It's interesting to see all the different things that happen in the plot. That's better than a plot being slow-paced, of course. But seriously, if anyone's trying to kill her, they're doing an inexcusably horrible job. So they're about as easy to take seriously as Elmer Fudd. The scream of insane organ music assaults her ears until she passes out, for no reason, and wakes up comforted in the arms of the mustache guy and blushes. He asks her how she got in the cellar, as I'm wondering why the organ music was even a thing. It didn't benefit him at all. He explains that he had come here to fix the furnace and found her. Sabrina tells him what happened, and instead of him giving her a logical explanation, he just says that she's overawed after all, and tells her to go back to her room. What, does he not believe her? Why would he assume she'd lie about that? He says that he doesn't smell any gas, somehow, and Sabrina naturally can't make it open again because she did it by accident before. Wait, she's a witch! But her magic didn't work before, so apparently the entire manor is enchanted. He says it's solid as a rock, and that the eerie depressing house just works in her imagination. Sabrina says she'll try to rest, when she could just leave. She would not look like an idiot if she tried to leave and wasn't able to. Sabrina thinks that there's an evil presence in the house that wants her dead, and she wonders if her uncle wants her dead or not. But why would he want that? If he had wanted her dead, he would have just pointed and given her a heart attack. It's like Shadow, he's so overpowered that you can't write him to actually want someone dead and not have him kill them, or it'd get really stupid. The door opened easily this time. She's in the grip of an unworldly force that's somehow allowed to do it at once for no apparent reason. And she's propelled down the dim hole to a door. She felt the pressure at her back as she opened the door and started up the stairs. The whole time I was reading the story, I was thinking that this is the kind of story that I would never expect to see in the later Sabrina comic, and never would. Because it's so different from everything else for no reason that it's just too gutsy for it. If the premise was justified right from the start, this would be fine instead of me being too confused from plot holes to take things seriously. Plus, there's no way she'd be killed off. It's a lighthearted comic. So what's the point of trying to do a horror story where all the characters have plot armor? She hears a creak from a treasure chest in a dusty little room. What she can learn from family albums and legal papers tells her about a cousin Thomas, heir to Doomsbury after her demise. And she's naturally confused at first. Tom is short for Thomas, apparently. I knew a kid named Thomas once. He was never called Tom. So it turns out that the guy she had a crush on was actually her cousin, who was sneaking up on her and accused her of snooping. The idea that he was a bad guy not to be trusted had been given away the instant he was drawn smirking. in the first panel he showed up in. And I already didn't like him for acting like he didn't believe her. And he has a mustache when she has a crush on him, as a teenage girl. Sabrina confronts him on trying to kill her, and like I said before, if a witch wants to kill someone, they just point and instantly give them an aneurysm. It's more interesting of the story to have a wide variety of death traps against her, and it'd suck if she got killed off, especially that easily. But this is exactly why you can't write an overpowered character to want her dead then, because you're not allowed to have the story make sense. No one is lampshading the fact that he's been inexcusably incompetent the whole time because of his complexity addiction. If the story wasn't taking itself too seriously as if it was a played straight plot ripoff, the most pointless ripoff imaginable, then Tom would explain that he thought pointing and instantly killing her would be way too easy, kinda justifying the story. What made him think that playing really loud organ music would kill her? It just knocked her out. You'd think a witch would be able to make music so loud it'd be guaranteed to kill her, and he would have used a lot more gas than that. He rushes at Sabrina screaming as her back's to a tower window, and I wonder why, instead of insisting on killing her, he didn't just ask to live with her. She had even said, "Stay with me." So did he have any actual reason to not just literally take her up on her offer? He's that insistent on living in that house alone? Wouldn't he prefer to have someone else pay the huge mortgage on that house? How is Sabrina supposed to pay those taxes? She clearly didn't even like the house. She didn't feel welcome there. The story's being too serious, but I know it can't go too far, so Sabrina's just helpless, standing there doing nothing until he trips on a fallen cane. Granted, it is far more interesting that he got killed by tripping on a cane and falling through a window, but it'd be more family-friendly and logical if Sabrina was able to freeze him in time. Also, that window was made of the weakest glass ever. I know that window glass isn't that fragile. Maybe it's justified because the window is really old. I know that in the AVGN review of Paperboy, he kept throwing newspaper out a window and it took forever to even crack. If Sabrina's unable to use magic in the story, which was so unintuitive that I actually kept forgetting about it, what was the point of the girl being Sabrina at all if she never used magic, other than getting us excited for nothing? It'd be less annoying to use Harvey instead. The shattered window suddenly lets light and warmth into the house, which doesn't make any sense. And suddenly the window is cheerful and gay, a line that dates the comic. Sabrina thanks the painting of her uncle, and I'm completely confused when she somehow assumes that he cut off her witch powers, and not the powers of the guy trying to kill her. Wouldn't she have preferred to have handled them with magic herself in a non-lethal way? Wouldn't you find this traumatizing to witness? He'd be made to suffer a lot more if he was put in prison because of her. I get what she was going for here, that she thinks it's sweet that her old relative saved her. But still, it's so convoluted that he cut off her powers and not the bad guy. At least the story being so different made it really stand out. And the Sabrina stories would probably get stale if there was never a story like this. I wish I knew the writers of the stories in this comic, but I don't because they didn't know to put their names in the right places. Whatever. The first story was about Hilda doubting that Harvey could play guitar well, being mean-spirited about it in a way that drags on too long. So Sabrina predictably makes him great at it with magic. But of course this has unintended consequences because she made an impulsive decision only thinking about the short term. So it's expected to play in front of an audience. And the two witches cast and uncast a spell on him over and over, because Hilda's smart enough to realize Sabrina used magic on him and figure it out right away. Then there's thankfully a plot twist, as yet another cousin of Sabrina's uses magic to make Harvey great at playing the guitar again, which impresses Hilda because she thinks he's doing that on his own. The cousin doing that was sweet enough and unnecessary enough that I didn't mind the complete lack of foreshadowing. After all, while he came out of nowhere, it made logical sense, so what's into Deus Ex Machina? She did say that a cousin will be around there, so it's smart that at least one cousin showed up, but we should have been told he'd show up earlier. The second story is an inferior second go at the story about Sylvester in the previous issue, where he's got a different name and the characters all act like this is the first time they found out he was a hippie now, and yet they never referenced Sylvester. Only this time, he's not explaining that the new witches are good to mortals, which was really important exposition explaining that not all witches are like Hilda, and Sabrina isn't the only good witch. And it was subversive because it wasn't completely wrong, or completely right. But here he's just a complete idiot, trying to confirm Hilda to hippie ways when he should know it's pointless. And this would be fine if it was explained that he's just doing this to spite her for being mean, but instead he just acts well-intentioned. The previous story with the hippie was more nuanced, showing the positive side, an actually important part of his new movement. You know, the whole thing that his necklace is about. But he's just about everything that doesn't matter. So it's frustrating to watch. It wouldn't be so frustrating if it was Sylvester again, because then it could be adding to it, instead of it feeling like trying to retcon that story. The third story was what I mistakenly thought would be the worst one. It's mostly an Archie story, and it tends to drag out mundane plot points that are boring for too long and bore me instead of being faster. Sabrina feels sorry for Archie at basketball, so she makes him an amazing basketball player. But when that has extremely predictable consequences that she should have known if she stopped to think first, she undoes the spell. She wanted him to cheer up, why didn't she just cheer him up with magic? You'd think everyone around Betty would have heard her crying and comforted her. For such a predictable and basic story, it sure took too long. The final story was about Sabrina going to rest at a manor she inherited from her uncle alone, even though the comic is called Sabrina the Teenage Witch. This would be fine if it was explained in the narration that she's an adult in this story. It took itself noticeably too seriously right away, considering that the narration by Sabrina was jarringly pretentious and gloomy, and its setting was the cliché haunted house. It seems tacky to try to keep telling the audience that something's menacing before finally showing what's menacing. I mean, it gets me cynical. Like, how scary could it be? I knew she'd have plot armor the whole time. Despite this, it still kind of worked as a tense, grim story, especially when she fell down the stairs because of gas. But why didn't she just walk out the door and leave? Immediately after she got scared of the place. So the whole thing was an idiot plot, a bad writing trope. And Tom's an idiot too. First off, he should have known that he could have just talked things out with Sabrina and asked to keep living here if he wants to so badly. He never explains himself properly. He just jumps to wanting to kill her. You think he could chase her out by simply using magic to keep the house as spooky as this? And after a day longer, she would have taken off. She was already scared right away. He could have easily solved this peacefully. I don't think she wanted the manor. He was also an idiot by trying all these ineffectual things with his magic, like playing an organ too loud, instead of simply pointing at her and giving her a heart attack right away. He'd win in a second. Why didn't he simply brainwash her into not wanting to stay here anymore? Or, if I was somehow expected to believe he was immortal when he had access to death traps like gas and played really loud music with no consequences to himself, then still, he could have waited until she fell asleep and then killed her with no resistance, or just talked her into leaving the house. What an idiot. He has a complexity addiction. I did love the twist that she got led to legal papers that told her who he was and what his motive against her was. But the fact that the story involved a ghost just made it feel contrived. It wasn't explained why the ghost was allowed to be on Earth. Couldn't she have found the legal papers from simply exploring the house of her own free will? Why did the ghost have to lead her to them? What took so long? The whole time I read the story, I wondered if this was a whole story rip-off of something else I didn't get. Because that explained why the story is nothing like Sabrina, starts out immediate res with Sabrina in a role she'd never be in, and shockingly, doesn't even take advantage of her magical powers. So then what was the point? I got my hopes up when she said it was silly of her to not use magic when she was freaking out about being locked in. But instead of the story being creative, her magic didn't work. Because her uncle stole her magic for no reason when he wanted to protect her? It is a unique story by Sabrina standards. This would never happen in the 97 comic. So it gives me the kind of gutsy story impression that early Archie Sonic had, where the writers were daring enough to write anything, and you never knew what you'd get next. So at least this makes a big impression on me and wakes me up, instead of letting me get bored of Sabrina stories. Already I was starting to notice that the comic was focusing too much on a formula where Sabrina's one spell screws up for the whole story, which just makes her look like an idiot.